Hare Krishna. So today we're doing our eighth session of the Bhakti Shastri course on the Bhagavad Gita. And today we're going to be doing chapter 4, verses 11 through 23. Maybe we'll get a little bit to 24, but I think we're going to try to go up to 23. And so we'll start out with verses 11 through 14. And this section gives us further indications of bhakti, and it brings us back to the discussion of karma yoga without material desires that we interrupted at the end of the third chapter and the beginning of the fourth chapter. In the earlier chapters, Krishna indicated that those on the yoga ladder require an element of bhakti in order to be successful. There are a couple of verses that indicated that. Bhagavad Gita 261, the one who restrains his senses, keeping them under full control, and fixes his consciousness upon me, is known as a man of steady intelligence. And in 330 he says, therefore, O Arjuna, surrendering all your works unto me, with full knowledge of me, without desires for profit, with no claims to proprietorship, and free from lethargy, fight. And up until that point, we hadn't heard a great deal about Krishna, at least from his own mouth, and so it wasn't necessarily clear to the reader exactly why it was important for him for Arjuna to fix his consciousness upon Krishna and then surrender all of his works and have knowledge of him. And so, in the early part of the fourth chapter, we found out a lot more about Krishna, and these things began to make more sense. So in verses 4:6 through 4:10, Krishna gave information about himself which nourishes the bhakti component for those on the yoga ladder, and even more importantly indicated that bhakti is a powerful standalone process. So, for those who are trying to fix their consciousness on him and surrender their actions to him, Krishna gave much more information about himself. And then he indicated in 4:9 and 4:10 that maybe bhakti was more than just an add-on component. Maybe this wasn't just something added to the yoga he was teaching, the karma yoga and the sankhya yoga he was teaching, but it might be something that could just stand alone by itself. So in text 4:9 he says, one who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. Now that's the whole goal. Krishna was telling Arjuna from the very beginning. And in fact, this is the first time he spoke directly about attaining him in transcendence. He mentioned previously about deathlessness in 2:15, and at the end of chapter 2, about Brahma Nirvana. So he was telling Arjuna from the very beginning, you should transcend. Only the foolish persons think that any goal within this world is reasonable and acceptable. He says, transcend the three modes of material nature. He continuously is urging Arjuna to pursue transcendence. And here it says, just if you understand, and we talked about this in some detail last time, about my transcendental existence, basically, that I'm beyond this world. My actions and my birth activity, everything is beyond this world. And if you understand that, you can join me in my world. And so so it begins to look like maybe that's all you need to do. If that performs the whole, causes the result to happen, if that's sufficient, right, what do you need anything else for? And then he says again in 4:10, says, being freed from attachment, fear, and anger, being fully absorbed in me and taking refuge in me, many, many persons in the past became purified by knowledge of me, and thus they all attained transcendental love for me. Previously Krishna was talking about this, this nishkama karma yoga, performing the right, doing the right thing, following your dharma, while not wanting the payoff, while not wanting material results from it. And this was supposed to lead one to realization of the soul that he described in the second chapter, the Sankhya Yoga section, where he described how we're the soul. and that Arjuna was supposed to do his duty, but do it with this correct mentality where he doesn't want the results. Generally, one's karmic duty provides certain enticements. We talked about how the Kshatriyas, if they died on the battlefield, they would go to the heavenly planets, where the Devatas live, where the demigods live. So you get good karma for it. That's why you do it. But Krishna says, if you want to transcend, if you want to go beyond this world, then you do those same things, but you do them without the desire for the payoff. And we talked a little bit about how that helps you to break the hypnotism. We're focused on the externals. And even though Krishna says we are what the entity that's seeing, he says, Avinashi Tadvidi. In 217, he says, we're consciousness. We're the experiencer. But we're so absorbed in the experiences, we forget that we exist separately. And so acting in that way where we're not expecting material results helps someone to begin to realize themselves, the observer. And so this is what he's teaching Arjuna. As devotees, we try to do a similar thing by simply acting for Krishna's pleasure, and that's supposed to help us to end the absorption. But here, Krishna's talking about something even more powerful, going back and joining him. And he doesn't talk so much here about anything else. He says, if you understand me to be transcendental, and if you're absorbed in him and you take refuge in him, so that purifies you, and they all attain transcendental love for Krishna. So this is kind of the first indication. The Bhagavad Gita is teaching bhakti, but here in the first 6 chapters, he mixes bhakti in with this notion of the yoga ladder, and but here is the first really strong indication that bhakti is not only required, but it's completely sufficient. And then here, in the beginning of this section here, 11 through 14, Krishna kind of carries on in that same regard. He says in 4:11, as all surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. Everyone follows my path in all respects, O son of Pritha. And in 4:14 he says, there is no work that affects me. This is a lot like 4:9. Nor do I aspire for the fruits of action. One who understands this truth about me also does not become entangled in the fruitive reactions of work. So in this whole karma yoga process, we're trying to eliminate the reactions, the karmic reactions. That's what allows for liberation to take place. The karmic reactions bind the body and soul together. So here he says, you just have to understand. Just like before, he said you have to understand how Krishna is transcendental. We understand that his activities, when he appears on this earth, don't affect him at all. He says, I have no desire for anything. I'm the Lord. I have everything. So that will cause liberation. So again, it continues along in that same vein. It says, as all surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. So previously he said, if they take refuge in me, absorbed in me, then they get love from me. So it gives this very clear indication that there's a bhakti process, that of course Krishna will explain this in detail later, that doesn't require anything else. It's fully self-sufficient. Now let's take a little bit of a look at that verse 4:11 in more detail, because it's a really central verse. Really, it's a very famous verse. Everybody will know it, and but it's ye yata mam prapadyante tangstatayava bhajamyaham mamavartmanu vartante manusya partha sarvashaha. As all surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. Everyone follows my path in all respects, O son of Pritha. Okay. So one interesting word here is this bhajami, reward. Prabhupada gives, it's two interesting things. How everyone follows his path, and also this bhajami. We'll talk about those two things. Prabhupada, in other places, I have a slide here where if you look on the Veda base online, you can click on any of the individual words in the word-for-word translations, and it can show you where Prabhupada has translated the same word in different parts of his writings. And it quotes where they're from. And so there's a few places where it says bhajami is reward, another place reciprocate, and then I worship or worship, many places. Some of this is from the Brahma Samhita. So the tamaham bhajami. I worship, I offer obeisances, bestow my favor, offer my obeisances, offer my respectful obeisances, offer my worshipful respect. So I think if we look at these other meanings, to worship, to offer obeisances, to show this kind of respect, we can see something of Krishna's heart in this. So it says, as people surrender unto him, he rewards them or reciprocates, but it's done with a heart. He shows such regard for those people who are surrendering from him. It shows, it hints at how he loves everybody. And however you do it, he gives whatever reward. And it's mentioned, in Prabhupada's purport, he puts it like this. He says, for those who are fruitive workers, the Lord awards the desired results of their prescribed duties as a Yagneshvara, and those who are yogis seeking mystic powers are awarded such powers. In other words, everyone is dependent for success upon his mercy alone, and all kinds of spiritual processes are but different degrees of success on the same path. So even if we're not looking to be so closely associated with Krishna, if one is looking for, he says, karma or mystic powers, even those persons, he's rewarding it. Bhajami still applies to them. So it shows the kindness that he has, the regard he has for all of us, all of the spirit souls. And he's giving us that leeway to approach him. So you can't avoid approaching him, because and this will be explained a lot more thoroughly later on in the later chapters, 7th chapter, 9th chapter. We'll hear how, and we already learned this in Isha Upanishad, how the Lord is the source and the controller of everything. And so there's no escape from the Lord. We have to, if we're part of reality, we're his creation, and we're in reality. And so no matter what we do, we're interacting with Krishna in some way. So it's not even a question of spiritual path or a not spiritual path, a religious path or a not religious path. Whatever we do, we're interacting either directly or indirectly with the Lord. And so he says, however you want to interact with me, then I respond in that same way. So even if you're an atheist, you don't want there to be a God. And Krishna responds in that way. That he gives people the intelligence to help that. He doesn't impose himself. He could just, and people say, why doesn't God just appear if he exists? Well, you don't want him to, generally. And so he allows you he interacts according to your desire. And does it with great kindness. So any other path, all the different types of yogas, any kind of spiritual path, he says that's my path. He set them all up. Those are all ways to interact with Krishna. So when we talk about bhakti, that's not just one of many paths. That's what Prabhupada says interesting. He says, all kinds of spiritual processes are but different degrees of success on the same path. Everything else, all the other possible paths, are things that Krishna has given according to our desire to relate with him or not. and how we want to relate with him. So those two things are there: his affection and the fact that he's really inescapable, and so this is very 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 powerful, and so it shows that if all the other paths are simply different varieties in how we relate to him, and he already says if we're absorbed in him and we're taking refuge in him, that we'll get love for him. That means, of course, he's going to love us back. Then it's hard to see how anything else can compare to that. And again, it looks like bhakti is something that stands alone. And of course, that will be confirmed in later chapters. So there's also this verse is 4:11 anticipates and helps to explain. There's the climactic verse of the whole Bhagavad Gita, 1866, which says, "Abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all sinful reactions. Do not fear." That's the the climax of the whole, the climax and conclusion, really. The ultimate conclusion of Bhagavad Gita. That we're just, he says, give up everything else, tells Arjuna, give up all the other paths, give up everything else, you just surrender unto me. He confirms what seems to be implied by this verse here, and what we heard in the beginning of chapter 4. So we can see this as a kind of a prelude to that, and explains why it makes sense for him to say such a thing. Because all the other varieties of religion are simply other aspects of Krishna's own path, although our relationship with him is less direct. So very, very important verse, this 4:11. So carrying on, then the question can be raised that what keeps people from surrendering to Krishna in bhakti, or even at least following the path of karma yoga without material desires, which Krishna has been teaching to Arjuna? Why doesn't everyone at least aim for liberation? Because we see there are people that don't. And then verse 4:12 indicates that. Krishna says, "Men in this world desire success in fruitive activities, and therefore they worship the demigods. Quickly, of course, men get results from fruitive work in this world." So even though all the paths, including that one, are coming from Krishna, we see that people even perform worship, but of entities other than Krishna. So that seems strange, given what Krishna has said. But we've already heard that explanation for that back in chapter 2. So remember, chapter 2 is kind of a summary of all the major topics in Bhagavad Gita. And so it's not surprising that the answer to this has already come to us. In verse 2, chapter 2, 42 and 43, it says, "Men of small knowledge are very much attached to the flowery words of the Vedas, which recommend various fruitive activities for elevation to heavenly planets, resultant good birth, power, and so forth. Being desirous of sense gratification and opulent life, they say that there is nothing more than this." We talked about that people may understand that there's a soul, which is eternal. But they have no faith, Prabhupada says, in liberation or transcendence. They think that the body and soul are both necessary components to life. That the soul may be the witness, the soul may energize the body. But without a body, the soul can't perform any activities, it can't have a life. And so they perform good karma. That's their idea. Build up good karma and enjoy the reactions. And so, as I said, there's nothing more than this. They don't think there's a hope for liberation or a spiritual existence as actually exists. And then he says in 244, "In the minds of those who are too attached to sense enjoyment and material opulence, and who are bewildered by such things, the resolute determination for devotional service to the Supreme Lord does not take place. He mentioned in 241 that in order to be aiming towards liberation, as Krishna is instructing Arjuna to do, that one has to have this fixed intelligence, this yavasa atmaka buddhi, resolute determination and understanding. It's not such an easy thing to do. We're so much accustomed to living through the mind and the body. And we can't hardly even understand that we're a soul. So it's very, very difficult if we're going to take up that path to try to understand ourselves as spiritual beings and to enter into the spiritual atmosphere. We're fighting against a whole lot of inertia that's built up lifetime after lifetime. So it says it takes really, really a fixed determination. Without that resolute and fixed determination, he says here that it says in 241 that we have many objectives. Our intelligence has many branches. We take many things to be valuable. So we really have to focus that this is the thing that's the most valuable thing, and I'm going to concentrate my energy on that. And there can't really be too many other objectives. Otherwise, it's not going to work. It says that, and especially this notion of that Krishna keeps coming back to the sensations of the sensations that we get from our senses, causing us either pleasant feelings or unpleasant feelings, and being controlled by those things, desiring those things, having that seem to be a real important objective in our lives. This is what causes us to not be able to see our own selves, but to simply be focused externally. It absorbs our attention to the point that we can't understand ourselves. So this is what causes it. So the same thing, it said it says, they desire success in fruitive activities. That's what he's talking about. So we already came across that. And then in chapter 3, we also came across the cause, which is what keeps people, again, this is in 339 and 40, it says, thus the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust or kama, which is never satisfied and burns like fire. And then in 340, the senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. So we've come across these things previously, that even though we're eternal spirit souls, even though liberation is there for us, it's the best thing. And we need to worship Krishna in some way, whatever path we take, in order to achieve liberation, at least. People don't worship Krishna. They want to improve their life here and now, or in the next life here and now. So we've seen these different things. So we can't make a strong fixed determination to do it. We don't have enough faith or commitment, or we're overpowered by this. So this we talk about this insatiable enemy, kama, desire. Even if we have the resolve at one point where we fight it, it fights us and covers over our understanding and knowledge. So we talked about last time how that's a huge obstacle to our spiritual growth, and Krishna gave us some keys in how we can work on that. Because even if we have that strong determination, we can waver and do waver so often. And then for the next verses is, Arjuna may wonder why Krishna has instructed him to do his varnashram dharma, and why Krishna does so as well, considering it appears to be on the level of karma and not leading to liberation. Arjuna even previously was wondering why he had to fight. If really understanding ourselves as a spirit soul, or understanding Krishna, as we heard in the 4th chapter, as transcendental, would be enough for liberation, and would be, a much more valuable goal of life than anything to be obtained either on the earth by victory in the battle or in the heavenly planets by defeat. We talked about if the warriors die in battle, they go to the heavenly planets, and Krishna told Arjuna as much in the very beginning of Bhagavad Gita. No, it's only a good thing. But later, Krishna emphasized that we don't want either of those goals. Neither of those goals are of any real import. We want to transcend. And so Arjuna can wonder, why does Krishna keep emphasizing you should fight? You should fight. And why Krishna acts also, even though he says he doesn't have any desires, and he doesn't desire any of the results of his activities. Why is he doing it? Because Krishna is also acting like a warrior. And so then Krishna explains in the next two verses, 4:13 and 4:14. He says, according to the three modes of material nature and the work associated with them, the four divisions of human society are created by me. And although I am the creator of this system, you should know that I am yet the non-doer, being unchangeable. There's a little play on words there, kartavyam and akartavyam. He's the doer and the non-doer in that verse. So Krishna says, I set up this whole system where there's the brahmanas, the wise, saintly, priestly caste, the kshatriyas, the administrators and warriors, the protectors. The kshatriya means one who protects from hurt. And they're not supposed to be tyrants, but they're supposed to be protective of everyone. Use their strength for that. Supposed to be very chivalrous. The Vaishyas, or the merchants or agricultural people, do trade and banking, such things. And then the workers, the Shudras. And they all have, and it says it's set up, he says it's set up according to guna and karma, their nature and their activities, qualities and activities. So you will be suited for a particular place in the society, and the dharma, the rules that you follow, will be suitable to your nature. So the warriors, their fighting is good for them. They're not traumatized so much. These days, everybody who goes to war, so many of them come back with post-traumatic stress disorder. It's a horrible thing. The kshatriyas, if you look in some of the other histories and in the Srimad Bhagavatam and other places, you'll find how even when it's quite horrific, the battles are quite fierce, and there's so much death and dying, and that the kshatriyas aren't traumatized by that. They somehow they have a certain heroism in them that just, it's somehow their place. It doesn't bother them. They get wounded all the time, and it just doesn't trouble them like that. So it's somehow part of their nature. And the Brahmins, they have a certain lifestyle. Usually they don't live a very lavish lifestyle. They're quite renounced and live very peacefully, and that's suitable for them. The Vaishyas, the merchants, they like to make more and more money, as such people tend to do, and they're taxed heavily, and they have to give in charity. So that they're given certain codes of behavior that's appropriate for their personality. And by doing them, by following the rules, they're fighting against this thing that Krishna keeps mentioning, attachment and aversion. Arjuna's faced with having to fight when he doesn't want to. And there may be times when they want to fight, but they're not allowed to. So Krishna says you have to control that attachment and aversion. So it gives that sort of thing. But he says, I created the system, but I'm not a part of it. You shouldn't think that I'm a regular being. You already explained. He's a transcendental being. He doesn't die. His body doesn't deteriorate. He's quite different than us. And then he says, there is no work that affects me, nor do I aspire for the fruits of action. One who understands this truth about me also does not become entangled in the fruit of reactions of work. So again, he reassures Arjuna. If you do the same, if you understand this about me, and of course you act in the same way, without wanting the fruits, he's already instructed him in that if you do that, it's safe for you to act. And we went over this previously in chapter 3, because Arjuna had some similar doubts. And because here in 3:19 he said, therefore, without being attached to the fruits of activities, one should act as a matter of duty, for by working without attachment one attains the supreme. That's what he tells him. Kings such as Janaka attained perfection, 3:20, solely by performance of prescribed duties. Therefore, just for the sake of educating the people in general, you should perform your work. And 3:25, as the ignorant perform their duties with attachment to results, the learned may similarly act, but without attachment, for the sake of leading people on the right path. So now Krishna he's coming back to this topic that he's talked about before, this karma yoga without acting without any kind of material desires. And so he set that up. He's showing Arjuna that this is also my path. I've set this up, this varnashram system. You perform those duties within the system, but not like an ordinary person does. You do it without, you do it understanding me and how I'm acting within it and why. He mentioned in chapter 3 also, he says, if I didn't follow these rules and regulations, everybody, because they follow great people, would imitate me. And they wouldn't follow them either. And the world would be in a big mess. So he's going to talk more about it. In this time around, he's going to talk about, it's going to be closer to what we heard at the end of chapter 2. First, in chapter 2, Krishna explained this nishkama karma yoga, doing one's duty without material desires. And then he mentioned how, at some point, it says your intelligence will come out of this dense forest of illusion, and you'll attain divine consciousness. And Arjuna asked, well, what will it be like then? How are people who are in that state? How do you describe them? How do they behave? How are they active? How are they inactive? How do they react to things? What kind of people are they? And Krishna described these. They call them sthita pragyas, or persons who are situated in profound knowledge. And so we mentioned that this is when that the nishkama karma yoga starts to really work and produce strong jnana, or knowledge of the soul, and how that really affects, in so many profound ways, the way that people understand themselves and the world around them, how they act, what they do. They're completely transformed in so many ways. That's hard for us to imagine because of the way we're used to living. And so here he's going to pick up the topic kind of along lines with that, how people who are acting, because it said, Arjuna asked, how do they speak in chapter 2? Meaning that the meaning was that when they encountered something unpleasant, they weren't upset by it. They would just say, oh, it's simply my karma, or they wouldn't even have bad thoughts. So if nobody was there to speak to, they wouldn't say, oh, this is terrible. They just accepted whatever came. This is simply my karma. And if there was an opportunity for happiness and enjoyment, they weren't attracted. And then he said, how do they sit? How do they remain inactive? And the example given was the tortoise. They can actually withdraw the senses from their objects. They don't have to pay any attention to the outside world at all, because they're already focused so much on their own spiritual selves. That's hard for us to understand. And then how do they act? It says they also, but they don't just sit inert. They can act, and they act without this attachment and aversion. That's what they said. So here we're going to hear more about how persons who have been practicing this nishkama karma yoga for some time, and their practice is going to become mature, what they look like, what their attitude is. And that's what we're going to hear. This is verses 15 through 23. And first of all, in 15, Krishna kind of reassures Arjuna again about the path that he's laid out for him. He says, all the liberated souls in ancient times acted with this understanding of my transcendental nature. Therefore, you should perform your duty following in your footsteps. So he's saying, this has been successful in the past, and it can be successful for you now. So again, he's fighting with Arjuna's tendency to want to find some way out of the battle, and he keeps bringing him back to this notion. So now you understand my nature as well. So you follow in my footsteps, act as I'm acting, but do your duty. You understand my transcendental position now. So you perform these activities now with your consciousness fixed on me, now with offering all your activities to me, and this is going to help you. Otherwise, it says without that, Krishna says it's not possible to control the mind and senses. That unless that element of bhakti is there, that the karma yogis will fail. The karma will be too strong for them. They'll be overpowered. So he reassures him. He says, "This has worked before. It's going to work again. You don't worry about that." And then he explains further about this notion that Arjuna brought up also in the 3rd chapter. Why can't he just withdraw from everything? He says, if intelligence is better than karma, why? Why does he want me to do that? And so Krishna gives a little further explanation. Last time he told him that if you prematurely, somebody who's at the sthita pragyasya, that has that profound knowledge, they can be inactive, but also says they can act. Action doesn't provide any barrier to them. It doesn't make them any less liberated. And he gave him the understanding in the last chapter that it's healthy for you for 2 reasons to continue to act. One is maybe if you're not to that level yet. He talked about the sannyasis, people who try to retire prematurely, and they can't control their bodies, or if they can, they can't control their minds. And also, as he said, as an example to others. The activities that Krishna gave in that Varna ashram system are beneficial for people, even if they're trying to get some kind of material result from it, because at least they're doing pious activities. If they're doing impious ones, their future is very, very dim. They may go down into lower species of life and such things. So this is very dangerous, especially to make any kind of a show of abandoning those duties, because they'll imitate that, and they'll be ruined because they don't have the spiritual consciousness. So he gave him 2 reasons, and now he's going to explain it a little bit more. He says in 4:16, he says, even the intelligent. So I guess he says that you shouldn't feel so bad about this. Even the intelligent are bewildered in determining what is action and what is inaction. Now I shall explain to you what action is, knowing which you shall be liberated from all misfortune. And in 4:17 he says, the intricacies of action are very hard to understand. Therefore one should know properly what action is, what forbidden action is, and what inaction is. And so there are three terms there: karma, vikarma, and akarma. And so in karma, these are the prescribed duties, his dharma, the things that he's supposed to do, and all people are supposed to do in their station in life. And under ordinary circumstances, they produce a positive karmic reaction. That's what they do. And that's usually why people try to do them. You try to build yourself a better future. Why do things happen the way they do? We understand it's from our previous karma. So if we have happiness, if we're suffering in some way, we had a hand in that, and we're now getting the result from that. So what we want to do, if we want to have a better future, is to focus on doing the right things and produce the benefit from that. That's how intelligent normal people should be. If they don't have if they're not don't have a deep enough understanding to see that we're spiritual and have transcendence in mind, at least do the right thing. And so you can try to enjoy life that way. Generally, people will tend to do whatever they can to enjoy. That's the natural tendency. And so if you do that, you'll end up doing a lot of wrong things and suffering more. So you build up the good karma, minimize the vikarma, or forbidden activities, and they produce a negative karmic reaction. So in the karma kanda section of the Vedas, that's what's advised. Perform karma, avoid the vikarma. And even though to our naked eye, there doesn't seem to be a correlation between those things. We see people will say, we see people who are really good people and they're suffering, or we see people who are really bad people who seem to be successful. But just wait. There is a certain cosmic justice. And so the next life you'll see people with two different outcomes. So the karma, prescribed duties, produce a positive karmic reaction. Vikarma, forbidden activities that produce a negative karmic reaction. And then akarma, or inaction. And it means you don't perform your prescribed duties. Arjuna was wanting to withdraw from the battle and just, he wanted to do like the Sthita Pragya with the turtle. Well, he wanted to be a beggar. He had different suggestions he could do. Be killed on the battlefield, become a beggar, or he thought maybe he could just follow the path, he says, of intelligence and stop all work altogether. And that, if done properly, produces no karmic reactions. So the person who's Sthita Pragya, who can withdraw the senses, who understands themselves as a soul, they can stop all of their duties. They don't have to perform their dharmic duties, and they don't produce any reaction from that whatsoever. They're on the level of the soul. It says they don't even have to perform. It mentioned in the third chapter, they don't have to perform the sacrifices to the demigods. The demigods are happy with them already, for having realized themselves as souls. So they don't have any duties, and they don't produce any karma. Okay? But such persons are quite rare. And it's dangerous to try to imitate such persons, as we heard already in the third chapter. And then Krishna comes up with this interesting statement where he said in 4:18, he says, one who sees inaction in action, and action in inaction, is intelligent among men, and he is in the transcendental position, although engaged in all sorts of activities. So a little bit of a puzzler here. How can there be inaction where there's action, and action where there's inaction? So let's take a look and see some examples of those things to see how that's possible. It's an interesting little verse there. So I've given a couple of examples of action where there seems to be inaction. Okay, where somebody is not acting, but yet there's action taking place. Okay, so it's not what it seems. And so the first one was Arjuna leaving the battlefield. Krishna says in text 233, chapter 2, text 33, he says, if, however, you do not perform your religious duty of fighting, then you will certainly incur sins for neglecting your duties and thus lose your reputation as a fighter. So there's I think in the West we call it sins of omission. So there isn't a sinful activity done, but there is a neglect of one's obligations. So here he said that if you don't fight, if you avoid your duty, then you're going to get sinful reaction. So there's apparent inaction. He doesn't do anything, but there's reaction. And we said akarma means that there's no reaction. It can be done in two ways. We'll see the way that it can be done with action. It can be done with you can have inaction, like the sthita pragya, the person who can withdraw their senses like a tortoise. That person doesn't do anything, and it doesn't receive any reaction to it, no karmic reaction whatsoever. So that's inaction in inaction, that situation. But here Krishna, if Arjuna avoids the battlefield, he's not acting. So there's inaction there, but there's action. There's a reaction that comes. It's just as if he did something like he did vikarma, like he did a wrong action. He gets that same result. So it's only apparent inaction. If there's a result, it's not inaction. It's just how it goes. And then we talked about the immature renunciant in Bhagavad Gita 3:6. It says, one who restrains the senses of action, but whose mind dwells on sense objects, certainly deludes himself and is called a pretender. So the physical action doesn't seem to be there. But again, they're neglecting their duties, and they do not have the realization of the soul. They're simply dreaming in the mind of all the things that they're missing out on by stopping their action. So the whole idea behind the nishkama karma yoga is to purify one, or the whole idea behind devotional service is to purify ourselves and to come to the deeper understanding of ourselves as spirit. At which time, all these wonderful things that attract us now won't seem very attractive, because they're not a part of us. This is the thing, when we realize ourselves as souls, then all these things are simply extraneous. It's like they're happening to somebody else. You're just watching a story, and if you're feeling happiness from within. So that we will see, as this section goes along, how these people act, and we'll understand why they act that way, because they have this deep knowledge that's awakened in them, that they realize themselves. Prabhupada says, not just theoretically, but practically. They experience themselves as souls. We know we're souls, but we experience ourselves as minds and bodies at this point in our life, for the most part. We're fortunate as devotees that we have many ways to experience what Prabhupada calls the higher taste. In that verse, it's param drishtva, the experience or the sight of the Supreme. We can experience this higher dimensional reality in so many ways. And so that gives us a real advantage. The person's undergoing this nishkama karma yoga, they really have to They have to wait. It takes a good while before they can get any kind of serious realization, and that's why forget about it in this day and age. It's not going to work. So one who restrains the senses of action but whose mind dwells on sense objects certainly deludes himself and is called a pretender. So there's apparent inaction, but they're going to get reaction for not doing their duties. And they're already and they're doing mental action. It's hard to stop doing anything. It's hard even to control the senses of action, but it's even harder to control the mind. And so they're just doing everything mentally instead of physically. So there's action in two ways. The reaction because they're not doing their duties and they're not qualified to stop them, and the fact that they're already acting mentally. So action taking place during apparent inactivity. And then the reverse, where there is action, but actually there's no action. And that means the result. There's no karmic reaction. And so there's two examples of that also. First of all is the devotee who serves Krishna. Prabhupada says in his purport to 418, a person acting in Krishna consciousness is naturally free from the bonds of karma. His activities are all performed for Krishna. Therefore, he does not enjoy or suffer any of the effects of work. Okay? So again, he's what we do in devotion that's accomplishes what the karma yogis do, not wanting a result, is we want something for Krishna. So it's not a selfish desire. So when we perform some activity, we want it to be for Krishna's pleasure, not for our own. And so in that case, there's no reaction. And we'll find out even more deeply as we go along that even the activities become spiritual, as we're going to reach that situation pretty soon. But he said the activities are performed for Krishna. Because what happens actually is how you get the karma. If you have that desire, you have the desire to have it, and you also feel that you're able to do it. We already heard in the third chapter that someone who's foolish, right? They think that they're the doer. That the physical body is acting, solely through our own efforts. So therefore we deserve it. He told Arjuna, he said that you have the right to perform your duty, but you don't have the right to the results. Because as a spirit soul, we can desire, but for the body and the mind to work, it actually needs help from external factors. Prabhupada's going to mention that a little bit later on in the purport as well. That we can't act independently. The soul can desire, but the body and the mind react to that desire. And it takes the devatas and ultimately the super soul to make that happen. So we can't do things independently. So he says, therefore you don't deserve it. He told Arjuna early on, he says that the soul doesn't kill or isn't killed, right, during the fighting. The soul makes a decision whether to fight or not. But the body doesn't move independently. There's help. So if we serve Krishna, we're thinking both of those ways. I don't want a result for myself. I simply want I want to dedicate this work or this service to Krishna's happiness, not mine. And I also realize that I need Krishna's help in order to even do the activity. And those things will keep the karmic reactions away. So if I think I'm responsible for the action, therefore it's natural. I have a right to the reaction, to the result. And if I want it, then it will come. Then the other thing is the karma yogi acting with knowledge of Krishna's transcendence and doing it without material desires, as Krishna mentioned to Arjuna. See the 4:15 that we just covered. Right? He said you do your duty. Right? Don't want the results, and understand that I meditate on me and think about my position where I don't want anything, I don't need anything, and I'm beyond that. The implication here is that the karma yogi should follow Krishna's example and act without material desire as well. That's what he should do. Follow Krishna's example. And then there's activity, but there's no karmic reaction. So generally, activity is measured by the reaction. If nothing happens, then nothing happened. That's the logic, right? And if something happens, something must have happened. So you judge it by the result, not by the appearances. You must have done something, otherwise, how can this happen? Or if you would have done something, something should have happened. You judge it by the result. That's how it works. So here, the verses that follow, they refer to one who is advanced in the practice of karma yoga and who is coming to the level of jnana yoga, like the person of profound intelligence, sthita prajna, described at the end of chapter 2. So we're getting a little bit more understanding of that condition. And this is something that that's really far out to us because we don't experience life that way. We don't. Or the way it's said, when that they're free of all desires in chapter 2 that come from the mind. When do we experience that, and how would we? It's very difficult. You try to resist it, you try not to have them, but we naturally do. So the reason that these people have they're living in a different reality. That's why we can't imitate them very well. That's why Krishna told Arjuna that he can't give up the battle. Because you're not ready for that yet. You don't have that experience of transcendence. You don't have the experience of yourself as a spirit. So therefore you can't do it. You can only fake it. And you won't be able to do it for very long. And this section is also really of interest to us. I mean, it's technically talking about persons practicing this nishkama karma yoga, but Krishna is very intelligent, and once we figure out what the Bhagavad Gita is all about, we can go back and we can look at all these verses. And this is what Prabhupada has done. He's given bhakti takes on all of these verses and so many parts of the Bhagavad Gita, because we can see things that are applicable to bhakti. Because as we mentioned, all of these yogas, the different yogas, they're parts of bhakti. Bhakti contains them all, and so we can examine our bhakti by looking at detail at these things, and we can see if there's something missing, if there's something that's out of balance. And so this is really interesting because this is how we should begin to become as we make progress in bhakti. Right? Because it says the various qualities described are also present in bhakti and will increasingly appear as we make advancement. So we should be, as we make progress in bhakti, we should more and more be able to perceive ourselves as spiritual beings. For us, we have the added thing that we're not only eternal spirits, but we're eternal servants of Krishna. But that should move from the theoretical to the practical. That's why Krishna says that we had to know in truth his transcendence. So we have to more and more understand. We can't even understand what transcendence is unless we begin to realize our own spiritual nature. That becomes a lot easier to do when we begin to understand our own spiritual nature. So some of the different qualities and the different way that these people with profound intelligence behave and think and feel, we should be feeling these things more and more and more. And if we're not, then we want to try to redouble our efforts. We want to see if there's something that we can do that we're not doing so well, so that we can begin to do this more and more. It should be happening. You know, Prabhupada said these things, the negativity should disappear from us. You know, lust, anger, and greed, should diminish. And how does it happen? Primarily, it happens through this deepening experience of ourselves as spiritual entities. It makes us live in inhabit a whole new reality when we do that. So this is kind of the interface here between karma yoga and jnana yoga. We mentioned before that nishkama karma yoga is producing this experience of them as spirit souls. That's jnana. It's morphing into jnana, taking the next step up the ladder. And we as bhaktas, as we perform devotional service, we should more and more experience ourselves as spiritual and not as physical and mental. Then there's even, we start with that, then we can go to the intellectual and ego level. But even if we just start with the physical and mental, those are things we're really familiar with. We shouldn't be identifying with that as much. Or at least we should be identifying less and less as we gain some positive experience, this higher taste. Okay, now in 419, Krishna says, one is understood to be in full knowledge, whose every endeavor is devoid of desire for sense gratification. So this is exactly paralleling what we saw in chapter 2. I think it's text 55, I think. He is said by sages to be a worker for whom the reactions of work have been burned up by the fire of perfect knowledge. So every endeavor is devoid of desire for sense gratification, meaning pleasant sensations. How does that happen? Because we feel all the time that that's what makes our life bearable, isn't it? We don't have any kind of pleasant sensations. Everything is miserable. People talk about that. They want, they just want to have a good time. It means we want to experience some pleasant sensations and try to get rid of unpleasant ones. That's usually how we answer the question, how are you doing? It's by seeing how much pleasure there is versus how much unpleasantness there is there. And without that, without any kind of any pleasant sensations, we think, well, life would be misery. This that karma, makes us feel like we have this constant need. That we're not just happy in and of ourselves. But of course, that's what it is we're supposed to be. So that's why they can be that way. The soul, we understood, doesn't change at all. There's nothing ever goes missing. There's nothing that gets added to it. All the best experiences in the world doesn't make it more than it is. And no bad experiences can affect it. But it's only because we're thinking that this is me. And we have that experience to a lesser degree. Even if we watch movies or read a novel or something, we identify with the characters and we feel, it's not so immediate as when we feel it directly, but we feel the emotions. So that's really what we're doing. Our life, we're unchanged, and we're filled with happiness. We're atmarama, fully satisfied. By nature, we're fully satisfied, but we don't experience life that way. So if we can experience our inner satisfaction, then it's quite natural for us, for how this person is acting. Every endeavor is devoid of desire for sense gratification. They don't mean anything. The different sensations just don't mean anything anymore. Things happen, it's more just like they're watching a video. It doesn't affect them to any real degree. And then in the purport, Prabhupada says, to 4.9, says, because the person in Krishna consciousness is devoid of all kinds of sense gratificatory propensities. Now this also he's saying that this is our objective anyway. It is to be understood that he has burned up the reactions of his work by perfect knowledge of his constitutional position as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he's connecting those two things very clearly here. That because when we say devoid of all kinds of sense gratificatory propensities, that's a real mouthful. Not just because sense gratificatory propensities is hard to pronounce, but it's and as devotees, what do we do when our service stops? It's not ever supposed to stop. But we do service for Krishna. What do we do when there's not an immediate act of service to do? What do we do? Are we constantly serving? Are we constantly chanting? Are we, do we not want to take a break and have some fun? Many people ask, like that. Can't you have both, Krishna consciousness and sense gratification? Because it just seems so, far out that you not have that. How can you enjoy life? You can do some service, but but no, he says. Prabhupada says, that's why he says perfect knowledge of his constitutional position as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So these two things are related, just like the karma yogi. It's related to his understanding of oneself as a soul. And when that happens, the world changes. I have it on good authority anyway, that the world completely changes. So if this stuff seems really far out to us and seems impossible, it's just because we haven't come to that point of sufficient realization. For all of us, to some degree, have seen serious changes in our lives that come from at least some understanding of the concept. So if we take it further and further, then this becomes very intelligible instead of sound really far out. So for the devotees, we're eternal spiritual entities, but we're servants. We have a specific identity as servants of the Lord. And for the karma yogis, they just have a notion that they're eternal spirits. They don't have that devotional component at that point. We'll hear later on how when they become perfect jnanis, how they can become eligible after some time to become devotees. In the 7th chapter, we'll understand how they transition to become devotees. Then here in 420, it says, abandoning all attachment to the results of his activities, ever satisfied and independent, nirashraya is a Sanskrit word there, not taking any shelter. He performs no fruitive action, although engaged in all kinds of undertakings. It means it doesn't depend upon anybody else. So no attachment to results of activities. That's the same thing. I mean, if there's no desire for the either for the immediate pleasant sensations, or sometimes we do things. Actually, it's a little bit different. We can do things that's immediately pleasurable and be attracted to that, or we can do things that will pay off later. Delayed gratification. And so here it says no delayed gratification either. People will, whatever they might do. They want to improve their health, and so they go through different things that may not be pleasant. Change their diet, exercise more, do all these kind of things, which may not be very pleasant in themselves, but then they look for a payoff. But it's going to be good for me later on. So it says they're not looking either for immediate gratification or for longer term results. Always satisfied, and that's because of that as spirits, that's all we have. We're completely satisfied. When do we ever experience complete satisfaction, and how long does it last? But actually, that's our nature. Performs no fruitive action, although engaged in all kinds of undertakings. So, Prabhupada mentioned that when he was publishing the Srimad Bhagavatam all by himself in India. He said he looked just like so many other people, reading the proofs, buying paper, taking it to the printers, like so many other people engaged in the same thing. But he said his consciousness was, his purpose and his consciousness was completely different. He was doing it as service. So the same way, the advanced karma and jnana yogis, they perform their activities, primarily to be useful to others, to set a good example, but their whole mentality, their whole way of looking at it, their whole purpose is different from anybody else's. Externally they look the same, but internally they're inactive, as we said. And then Prabhupada says, this freedom from the bondage of actions is possible only in Krishna consciousness, when one is doing everything for Krishna. So, two things there, doing everything for Krishna, so it means an advanced stage, which is possible only in Krishna consciousness. And so that reminds us that we're hearing about this yoga ladder, but it's not something that's practical in this day and age. We mentioned different reasons for that already. And so Prabhupada he emphasizes again and again Krishna consciousness and bhakti, because that's what the Bhagavad Gita ultimately is about. And we really don't have any other alternatives. Not really. So here on 421, such a man of understanding acts with mind and intelligence, perfectly controlled, gives up all sense of proprietorship over his possessions, and acts only for the bare necessities of life. Thus working, he is not affected by sinful reactions. And then in 422, he who is satisfied with gain, which comes of its own accord, who is free from duality and does not envy, who is steady in both success and failure, is never entangled. Who's steady in both success and failure is never entangled, although performing actions. And Prabhupada says that he knows that because he is part and parcel of the Supreme, the part played by him as a part and parcel of the whole is not his own activity, but is only being done through him by the Supreme. We talked about that earlier, how we're not able to actually to act independently. So that means we can't feel ownership, or as Prabhupada calls it, proprietorship. We don't deserve things. We want things, but how can we say that if we can't act independently to do it, that we deserve them? It says there's no proprietorship. Not hard work. We talked in Nectar of Instruction, about this desire for, this acquisitiveness, desire for more and more. If there's inner satisfaction, there's not the same motivation for really intense activity. Feverish, as Prabhupada calls it. Duality, we think this is good, this is bad. That's not so prominent. We tend, when we're not in the best of consciousness, we really can see big differences where there really are just small things. We really monitor. We have a tendency to monitor our sensory happiness and unhappiness really, really rigorously and almost obsessively. We notice all small changes. And so they're filled with the person who understands the soul is just filled with this happiness. And so these things are, it happens to us even now. And if we're really absorbed in one thing, we may not notice. Somebody is sick, and you cheer them up. They forget they're sick a little bit for a while. You can be distracted from pain sometimes. You can you can lose track of time if you're absorbed in something pleasant. You just don't notice it. The heat and cold won't make as much of a difference if you're really absorbed in something else. So the person who understands themselves as a soul is absorbed in that and not paying nearly as much attention to the sensations. The more you pay attention to them, the more you can distinguish between minor differences, and the more minor differences matter to you. And then a Krishna conscious person, this is also from Prabhupada's purport, this is from 422, a Krishna conscious person is above duality because he does not hesitate to act in any way for the satisfaction of Krishna. So we, to some degree, we have experience of that if we want to help somebody, if we have regard for somebody, love for somebody, we may do something that we otherwise wouldn't do. If that helps them out, we'll go out of our way, let's say, to help somebody. So it makes it a little easier for us because of that devotional component. That we say, well, this isn't a lot of fun, but I'm going to do it because Krishna wants it, because this will be pleasing to Krishna. And then the last verse in this section is verse 423, and I want in the PowerPoint I've put the whole verse up because the Sanskrit is a little bit important here because it's making a transition. So the Sanskrit is Gata Sangasya Muktasya Gyana Vastita Chetasaha Yagyaya Charita Karma Samagram Pravaliyate. And Prabhupada's smooth translation is the work of a man who is unattached to the modes of material nature and who is fully situated in transcendental knowledge merges entirely into transcendence. But there's a couple of words in here that don't make it into the smooth translation, but are there quite prominently in the word-for-word translation. Yagna Yacharata. Or Yagyaya Acharata. They're all it's put together. Yagya Yacharata. And the meaning there is Yagnaya is for the sake of Yagya or Krishna or Vishnu. We talked about sacrifice. We talked about that in the 3rd chapter. And Acharata, acting for the sake of sacrifice. And Prabhupada in the purport also refers to that section of the verse, even though he doesn't explicitly mention it in the smooth translation. I'm not sure why. He says, consequently, whatever he does, he's talking about devotees, he does for Krishna, who is the primeval Vishnu. Therefore, all his works are technically sacrifices, because sacrifice aims at satisfying the Supreme Person, Vishnu or Krishna. That's from his purport to 423. So this verse is a transitional verse, and that verse, that word sacrifice or yagya, is actually quite important because we're about to enter into a longer discussion of yagya, and we had it already in chapter 3 from text 3:9 to 3:16. We heard about it, but here we're going to learn a little bit more about it, and we're going to learn particularly how it relates to this goal of becoming transcendental, especially for these yogis, but also for us. Prabhupada has this beautiful purport in the next section that really shows us how our activities in Krishna consciousness are transcendental. So anyway, we heard the discussion in chapter 3 kind of had two different parts to it, kind of two different things, two themes are running through it. In 3:11 and 3:12, he said, the demigods being pleased by sacrifices will also please you, and thus by cooperation between men and demigods, prosperity will reign for all. In charge of the various necessities of life, the demigods being satisfied the performance of yogya sacrifice will supply all necessities to you, but he who enjoys such gifts without offering them to the demigods in return is certainly a thief. And my dear Arjuna, this is 3:16, one who does not follow in human life the cycle of sacrifice thus established by the Vedas certainly leads a life full of sin, living only for the satisfaction of the senses. Such a person lives in vain. So this section was just talking about how even in an ordinary person, not even somebody who's necessarily aiming for transcendence, needs to perform sacrifice, because we're living on things given to us by higher powers, especially the devatas. And so if we don't, we're thieves. Sin comes upon us. We have to show some gratitude for that which we receive. It just isn't. It isn't the fact that we're here and it's there somehow, and therefore it's ours. We have to give something back. But then there was another kind of theme that ran through it, and there's three other verses I'd like to recall from the third chapter, and where it says that work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed, otherwise work causes bondage in this material world. So we're talking here now more about transcendence. Therefore, O son of Kunti, perform your prescribed duties for his satisfaction, and in that way you will always remain free from bondage. Okay, so in one sense, there are sacrifices just for our sustenance and existence, and that's relevant especially for those who aren't engaged in transcendence. But but in another sense, this sacrifice contributes to us becoming liberated. And then in 3:10 it says, in the beginning of creation, the Lord of all creatures sent forth generations of men and demigods, along with sacrifices for Vishnu, and blessed them by saying, be thou happy by this yogya or sacrifice, because its performance will bestow upon you everything desirable for living happily and achieving liberation. And Prabhupada, the word is ishtakamaduk. It will provide everything desirable. And Prabhupada follows after Baladeva Jibushan, and they say that they mention specifically liberation. And that kind of foreshadows what's going to come up here in this fourth chapter. So Prabhupada explicitly includes liberation as one of these things that sacrifice can produce, even though it just says generally things that are desirable. And he says everything desirable for living happily and achieving liberation. He specifically mentions that. So he makes an important statement there. And then in 3:15 he says regulated activities, and this really transitions until this theme is going to be picked up in a big way in next week's class, where we start from verse 24. Regulated activities are prescribed in the Vedas, and the Vedas are directly manifested from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Consequently, the all-pervading transcendence is eternally situated in acts of sacrifice. So the sacrifice itself can provide access to transcendence. And so that's actually the very next verse 24, it really follows that understanding and takes it a little bit further. We're going to understand then how sacrifice is used in particular this way for attaining transcendence, for attaining knowledge. So this is what happens with these persons who are performing. This is one of the big ingredients of the persons who are following this nishkama karma yoga process, for them to transition towards jnana, where they have this deep sthita pragya, this deep, profound knowledge and realization. One major component is sacrifice done with a certain understanding. Prabhupada is going to, of course, tell us that we have a real advantage as devotees in this, because everything that the devotees do, mentions, can be considered forms of sacrifice. All of our service can be. We also have we know that the sacrifice, the yogya for the age, is the chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, but he says even all of the activities that we do in service of the Lord are considered to be sacrifices. So we have a big advantage over just the regular, even the quite successful karma yogis. So anyway, this is what we're going to pick up next time. We'll start from verse 24, and we'll conclude chapter 4 and maybe start chapter 5 next week. But anyway, thank you very much. Hare Krishna.